Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Cislunar Economy panel. I know we had a fantastic panel earlier. I think this is going to be a great one too. For those that I haven't met just yet, my name is Raquel Busquino, and I lead our Deloitte US Novel and Exponential Technologies team focused on sensing and making sense of new tech. Today's panel, we've got 4 incredible panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves here in a second. But we'll have 50 minutes, roughly like 35, 40 minutes of a discussion, and then we'll head into 10 minutes of Q&A. I know that they are eager for hard-hitting questions about the Cislunar economy, so no softball questions here. Let's get some good dialogue going. But we have Jeff Plate, we have Sita Sonti, we have Mandy Vaughn, and we have Blair DeWitt here, all really eager to answer your questions. And so I'd love for you all to just start off by introducing yourself, and we'll hear the first question as, what's your favorite moon TV show or movie? So we'll kick it off here.
All right.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll start. So, thanks. Probably my favorite one, and it's one that just I saw a couple of days ago, is the three-body problem. Definitely, there's a moon-based element to what they're talking about at the end of the show. So, for those of you who haven't seen it, so I'll leave it at that. Over to you.
Are we doing introductions too?
Yeah, I would say do some introductions.
Tell us about yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Jeff Plate.
We know you, but it's movies. That's it.
So I'm the CEO of Interstellar Mining. We're looking to put the first operating water mine on the moon. My terrestrial day job, I'm one of the partners at WGM, Watts Griffiths McEwitt. So I do terrestrial mining consultancy around the world. I run exploration campaigns for you name it. My background, I've got 4 degrees. I come from the finance world originally, and then I retrained as a geophysicist. So I'm an economist, a CFA, and a geophysicist. So, and I do a lot of work on the space side, on advising on exploration and prospecting techniques for where to find water and volatile resources on the moon.
that was better. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Get us all warmed up. Sita Sonti, Chief Executive Officer for Space Tango. I'm a mom, I'll start off with that, of 2 teenagers, one of whom is actively looking at college admissions, so that's basically dominating most of my brain and my heart. That aside, I'm honored to be joined by a number of my colleagues. Space Tango is the leading provider of microgravity-based research on the International Space Station. We recently launched on SpaceX 30. This year we're going to be on, if Dream Chaser flies, we will be on 6 launches, which is a new level of cadence, which is obviously a big theme for the overall space economy, the reduced not only cost of launch, but the increased frequency thereof, and redundancies for platforms. We've done 267 payloads. Danny, Molly, right? Yeah, okay, I got the number right. And counting. On 35 missions to the ISS. We are in active discussions with all the partners in commercial LEO destinations about being that continued microgravity research provider, stitching together our recurring customers, such as Cedars-Sinai Hospital, Mount Sinai Hospital, Mass General here in Boston. These are all researchers who have discovered that microgravity enables specific kinds of research that I can talk to anybody about ex post facto. Before this was the head of the space practice at Boston Consulting Group, but I got kind of tired of consulting and wanted to come back into industry, so I'm really excited to be joined by a really great team. Before that was the head of human spaceflight at SpaceX. Before that, Sierra, Raytheon, and had a career as a diplomat with the U.S. Foreign Service for 18 years. So if you guys are interested as students or as members of industry in either government service or industry service, come at me, because I will wax poetic about both. And my favorite moon TV show or movie, I'm gonna go with a really easy one because I've always had a crush on Matt Damon. I was born here in Boston, in Dorchester, actually, so I feel a kinship to Matt Damon. And I did not ever have a science degree, so I'm the faker on the panel. I have no background in engineering or science, but I can at least talk about it somewhat credibly. But when he says, I want to science out of this, I thought that was really exciting. So, The Martian.
That's awesome. A quick introduction, my name is Mandy Vaughn, and my day job, I'm the CEO of a small consulting firm called GXO, where we're working primarily with new space, companies that we think have cool, compelling dual-use potential with interesting commercial cases as well as national security missions where they can support too. But the flip side of that, where it gets really interesting, is because of that view that we see, that breadth, we're really working with a lot of the policymakers on the government side too, on where do we see common barriers, lack of initiative, policy problems to enable better use of those missions. So my day job does tie in with the panel, but I'm pinch hitting today on behalf of Revolution Space. Dr. Darren Garber is smartly on vacation with his kids this week. It's spring break, and so he asked me to step in. I'm member of his board at Revolution Space, where they're developing a new propulsion technology. So basically, it's a new spin on electric propulsion where you get twice the power to thrust as a Hall thruster for the same ISP. So you have maneuverability from anywhere from LEO, GEO, Moon, Mars, whatever. So it's an amazing team. They're located right here in Boston as well. So kind of fun to be able to support him and come back to my old stomping grounds as well. And favorite moon movie has to be 2001, because it's one of my favorite space movies ever. And it's like, okay, so in the moon scene's epic. But the beginning part where they go to the space station is like the coolest visualization of commercial space access and how that just can really change your life in a really neat way. And then near and dear to my heart, so I did go here, and in the book, HAL was activated in January of 1997. And that was my IAP during my freshman year.
I love it.
And they had a cool ceremony kind of talking about HAL and computers, and it's 1997 and what was in the movie and what was real. And they even had a cake, and we sang Daisy in honor of HAL being activated. So it's just kind of like hands down, that one has to win the day for me today.
That's great.
So I'm Blair DeWitt. My career started off in aerospace and government aerospace, and then I got pulled into pure high tech. I spent a couple of decades in Silicon Valley, up and down the valley, and then kind of ran that course and was a little like, okay, what's next? Had an opportunity to come here to get my master's. I had a very technical background, a lot of engineering, but I didn't know how to engineer capital. So I had an opportunity to come to Sloan, learn how to build a capital mechanism correctly. While I was on campus, got reinvigorated in aerospace. And by the time I graduated in 2016, realized that the next zone of economic activity in space would be the moon. And so as I was talking with organizations about their lunar interest, started assessing some of the common problem threads, we created Lunar Station to help address critical problems that others with lunar interests and activities had, which was there's data, but what do you do with it? How does that help? And so we created a geospatial analytics platform called MoonHacker. And MoonHacker has helped large heritage aerospace firms. Some of those firms have lunar heritage, all the way down to stealth mode startups that are just purely building their value proposition on lunar activity. So we've been able to help the gamut of organizations have better experiences and expectations of the moon. My favorite moon movie is a movie that was released in 2009 starring Sam Rockwell called Moon. And what I love about that movie is it's a mature lunar economy, a lot of automation, for the sole purpose of gathering helium-3 and bringing it back to Earth. It's the best vision for the moon I've seen yet.
Well said.
Didn't pick that one for you. We didn't have the same one. Okay.
Yeah, I love that. So, and it paints a picture of what we hope is a vibrant economy, but maybe we could start the discussion with where we're at right now, some of the current trends, the current state of the industry, and maybe some of the upcoming moon missions we have going on. So, Sita, Mandy, maybe I'll pass it to you to start if you have thoughts on where we're currently at in the story.
Okay. So I don't just have thoughts, I have news. I'm always excited to say. We at Space Tango recently won a $5 million contract with NASA to design the science payload to integrate science, which will be announced very soon, on Artemis 2. And it is the crewed lunar flyby mission that's coming up very soon. And boy, is it fun to not have a space mission that is lunar adjacent or directly contributing to the lunar economy, where our milestones are moving to the left, not to the right, from an operational standpoint. I mean, we're sort of slacking about this all the time and actually really excited about getting on program. What I think is, so that's exciting for us as an industry partner, as a trusted provider of Cube Labs, of scientific integration platforms that can work in orbit, whether that orbit is obviously low Earth orbit or lunar or beyond, but it's a pathway to something else, right? It is the belief that we're going to need to understand how certain parts of the human body change if you're participating in long-term human spaceflight. And every single vision, I love what you said, Blair, about describing that vision of the lunar economy as one of the most compelling yet, because you do have to actually have a meaningful, thriving system of humans to actually perform said spaceflight, but you can't do that in a vacuum. You have to have the science learnings in advance. And the fact remains that we at Space Tango are honored enough to be contributing to that. So that's one thing that is directly applicable to us that we know is creating the pathway, and it's not science fiction, it's reality and it's happening now, and we're part of that game. The other thing that I nerd out about is optical comms, because in order to send, receive any kind of data in lunar orbit, I mean, right now we're at the mercy of TDRS, the relay system where the downlink is 10 megabits per second, which is woefully slow. It's delay tolerant, which means you have to have a tolerance for delay. And anybody who's used to lots of data is not delay tolerant. We humans are not delay tolerant. When we're talking about the migration to what will be LunaNet, which excites me, like moon Wi-Fi, there's specifications, requirements that have been placed by NASA in public domain that will be used by, obviously, the Space Force and DoD-related agencies as well as part of that cislunar economy. But I nerd out about the creation of an internet that is entirely focused around the moon and the power that that can unlock. And obviously, it will need to be a prerequisite infrastructure to generate the kind of economic value that we're all talking about at a high level. So optical comms on the moon is part of LunaNet and contributing to scientific research for human spaceflight.
I love it. I love it. It's so many things that were once science fiction are now turning into science fact, and the fact that we're alive during a time where that conversion is happening so quickly it's great. Mandy, what are your thoughts here?
Oh, I think we're just about to see just the cadence of flights that are about to happen to go out to the moon and around and beyond is just starting. So we had Intuitive Machines with their mission in February. That was the first of dozens of CLIPS missions from NASA. And I actually speak a lot about what NASA did with commercial cargo and commercial crew as a good exemplar of where can a government entity set out a very clear manifest. Here's funding to help kind of seed the ecosystem to say, let's go. And we're just about to start seeing a lot of those missions fly. So this is gonna be super exciting. Some are gonna work, some aren't gonna work, right? Some will get another mission, some won't. That's how it goes. But the thing that I think where we need to kind of look at it more holistically, to your point on some of the infrastructure bits, what are the comms? What's the PNT? How do we want to, what's the norms associated with operating out there that we want to make sure we ensue so it's safe, it's sustainable, and it's a smart infrastructure at the end, right? So I think there's good leadership and amazing things about to happen, but what is that larger architecture and what do we want kind of the rules of the road to be when we actually start to have like, okay, now we're actually creating value out there unto itself. What do we want that to look like? And it's kind of a leadership opportunity and obviously an economic opportunity too. So that's really exciting and just starting.
Yeah. And so you're speaking a little bit to the rules of the road. How do government, commercial players, how do we all work together? Maybe I'll direct this one to you, Jeff. But as you think about how we can create a sustainable lunar ecosystem, what's top of mind for you in your work?
I think the top of mind, especially from the mining perspective, is you need to be able to live off the land. The resources, that's in situ resource utilization, space mining, whatever you want to call it, is very important. And recognizing the fact that government is going to have a role in the initial development and as a customer to do that. And then over the course of time, you will see a divergence whereby the commercial operators will be increasing in terms of their share of the market and the economy, and the government-related aspects, which will always be there, will decline over time. And if it follows the economic development model, if you look at terrestrial development of, say, the Americas, going back, 500-600 years in terms of how that evolved. So there's definitely an element for there. In addition, there's certain aspects for the public good that governments can provide in terms of things like geological survey work and other things that NASA has done in terms of good science work and the other agencies that provides the basis of information that allow the commercial operators to have the first high-level reconnaissance data sets that will allow you to do the planning and other things that are necessary for missions to occur. I know that going over to Blair, he will talk about this probably more extensively than I. So,
yeah, I mean, Blair, what do you think here?
Well, I think in general, innovation in of itself has a very nice, comfortable feel to it. I think really what innovation is the outcome of chaos. And so we see a lot of grandiose plans, but we forget the fact that here in the United States, there are different gauges for rail. So now we're living in a society where a lot of this chaos has been sorted out. And so there were key innovations in, okay, this didn't work, but this works better. I don't know if we can go to the moon with all the answers, frankly. I think we need to bring the chaos there, let experiments succeed, fail, how do they replicate, and then we'll really truly have lunar innovation.
Can I say something about governments and sort of policy? Because I think that's a foundation that I think undergirds the ability, or can either hinder or can empower the kind of innovation that you're talking about, especially on the moon. Mm-hmm. So Kongsberg Satellite, Norwegian company, right? They are one of the major providers of ground station capability that are going to enable LunaNet. There are bases for TDRS. They're what enable the 10 megabits per second. That under LunaNet, the requirement is 260 megabits per second. But you need ground stations on Earth to be able to send live video on the moon. That is actually one of the requirements for the Artemis missions, all of them. This is actually happening now, but the ability for NASA to be able to have a partnership with Kongsberg Satellite, it doesn't just happen in an ether. That's not chaos. To me, that's the opposite. That is the byproduct of smart policymakers thinking, okay, we've had this arrangement that's enabled us to use your ground stations, some of our ground stations. We send, a couple astronauts up to the ISS. Thank you for mentioning CCTCAP. It was because of that we at SpaceX were able to create human spaceflight as an entire P&L. Like, we just had a demo mission on the Crew Dragon with Bob and Mike, and because of CCTCAP, we were able to turn that into all of the crewed missions, Crews 1 through 7 or 8, I think, have gone up to the ISS, plus all the private astronaut missions that are leveraging that same partnership of international governments saying, I want to pitch in here, I want to pitch in here. So it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and I think it's important to give voice to the roles of the smart policymakers who say we want to be enablers with smart contracts, or we want to be enablers with smart international partnerships so that that kind of lunar economy can grow.
Mm-hmm. You need both the innovation and the partnerships. I think that's great. There's another piece here too, which is companies that were traditionally maybe non-space companies or didn't see themselves as playing a role in space are now seeing space as more accessible, right? They might say, oh, maybe I can be a part of this growing economy. Does anyone have thoughts here about, and I'll open it up to anyone who has a perspective, but how we can get more traditionally non-space companies thinking about their active role in space?
I'm going to take a swing at this first. With it, coming from the finance world originally, one of the things I always do is follow the money. And one of the things I've been seeing is a lot of the flows going into private money into new space because they see that is a new opportunity and the risk-reward elements there. And of course, the greatest reward you get is being on that pole position because once you have established yourself as the leading individual, you can create, especially in the cislunar economy, natural monopolies. And of course, with anyone knowledgeable of this, and I would assume at business school here, you get extraordinary profits when you get that environment. So there is opportunities to be had if you can get in there and take the risk and get there first. Really matters.
One thing I'll add here too, it's an interesting point, and we were just talking about it before in terms of how can we normalize the financial behavior of space companies, right? And you're right, because access and a lot of elements are on the verge of being commoditized, and but everyone has these business plans where it's like, I'm going to do space stuff, and here's my growth path. It's like, okay, temper. And
then Valley of Death.
Right, exactly. But then the Bureau of Economic Analysis did a really interesting study in terms of kind of looking at there's space for betterment of life on Earth, and then there's space where a lot of this is kind of emerging on, we're going to do things in space, we're going to create value in space that may come back to Earth or in the future may not. Right? And so those are very different economic models and levels of maturity. And because of that, the role of the government is very different in those two cases. And I think it was even mentioned quickly on the earlier panel too. And the role of the government not doing something can have a profound impact as well. So it's like, okay, how do we look at it, not just from the demand signal of here's my manifest, here's my up and down mass, but they're a regulator, they're a customer, they're an investor, and how do we help them think through curating this developing economy in a smart way that can actually then be more normalized and more just like every other economic sector.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I really like the commercial lunar payload service architecture. I think government as a client is fantastic. And I think that is sort of the chaos that we want. Now, not complete wild chaos, but the information curve for Apollo was very linear. We do a mission, we learn. We do a mission, we learn. This is, let's do 20 missions, all different engineering teams, and now you have an exponential learning curve. It didn't cost you as much money as the linear, and you accelerate and grow faster, but you have to accept failure. And I think that's where you sometimes see the capital markets not embracing the failure the way we would as engineers. Like, well, you got to test, you got to find out. And also with capital has to align to the event horizon, theirs and yours. And when there's a misalignment there, you're not going to secure that capital. So what is a 7-year event? What is a 12-year event? What's a 15-year event? What are the sources of capital for that? And I think that's where smaller, faster makes it easier for us to learn the things we need to do, take the risks down, compress the event window so that it's in better alignment with what the capital mechanisms are requiring.
Mm-hmm. And the access to data too, and maybe you could speak to this, but
yeah,
really creating a data marketplace so that those insights can be captured. I mean, maybe you could speak to some of the challenges of actually capturing data on the moon and what that looks like.
For sure. And I think when we first organized, we realized that the moon needed an acceleration in its data generation, first and foremost. Having one orbital satellite launched before the iPhone was released in the marketplace. You know, when you take Moore's Law, that's so old generationally in technology, and you have one, and that's a single stream of new information. Your refresh rate's slow. And having worked in financial services infrastructure, energy, transport infrastructure, military information infrastructure, it was appalling, right? So we're like, oh no, let's do a recon. And it was weird to hear that our clients were like, well, can you first make sense of the data that has been collected from Apollo to LRO? And so when we did that, we started realizing like, okay, you know, if you work the data right, there's some discovery, but there's an inherent problem. It's not very fresh, terrible resolution, and there were no real major gains made for a long time. Now, something else is about to change in the data market, and that is, up until now, all the lunar data is publicly available. It's a very flat market, right? To go get the data, you have to have the mindset of a PI, because the planetary data system that NASA has is a PI architecture, right? There's a little bit here, there's a little bit at UCLA, there's a little bit at JPL, and you're like, okay, well, which slice of data do I get? The major thing that's going to happen is when private companies send private sensors and generate private data, you're not going to find it in the PDS. That's like Shell looking for its next big dig and sharing it with Exxon. Not going to happen, right? So you're going to start seeing that there's a data tsunami coming, but we're not all going to benefit from it equally. So how do you manage that? And so that means you need a marketplace. And it's not a government marketplace. It's a New York Stock Exchange place. So if someone's going to set up a data exchange, is it really data dumps? Not really. You know, the work we do is because people don't want to pull down data and work with it. They have other things to do. They want the answers. And so there's a balance here between what's public, what's private, what's the value of that. And I think this is why we're seeing our government having trouble with data buys and other governments not even attempting to do data buys. You know, it's a very complex problem, and it's something that we're going to have to figure out on the fly. But to have the expectation that we can just run to the planetary data system for intuitive machines or astrobotics or Firefly, no, not going to happen.
Yeah, it's the development of the marketplace itself, and marketplace for data, but the marketplace for so many different things that really is the commercialization aspect of it.
Well, and the flip side of that is we do a lot of consulting for companies that want to know what's the high value data.
Right.
And how do I get that monetized, right? And so that they can get funded to build the gear and send it. So we're part of that value proposition solution is, okay, let's talk about what you are thinking about, what's the problem you want to solve, and then here's the data that could be additive to that, and then here's the added value for you, and then take it to VCs and go, oh, awesome.
I love the visions of the future, rooted in what's happening right now that each individually you're all painting. We've talked about current trends, where we're at. Maybe we could go a little bit even further to where we're heading. If you had to say 5, 10, 15 years' time, what does a successful cislunar economy look like? I'd love to hear, what does that vision look like for you and your work at each of your individual companies right now? Sita, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. We look forward to being part of an in-space sustainable manufacturing system that leverages the automation, the hardware and software that we're already using on the ISS, but in a lunar platform. And we look forward to being the largest producer of silver nanoparticles on the moon's surface. It's a simple, easy answer, and it's not just vision, it's definitely like business model.
Yeah.
I did want to say, Blair, I love what you said about the challenge of commercializing data and creating the marketplace. Those are concepts that in a business school environment or at a consultancy, especially when I was at BCJ, like you talk about the concepts, but when you're actually in industry, you have to put pen to paper to price something. You've got to throw paint on a wall, and you've got to say, I think I should charge, I don't know, 50 million for a seat on a Crew Dragon to go to the International Space Station. But you actually have to start somewhere. That's not just a conceptual exercise that you can do based on a total addressable market and a TAM, SAM, SOM analysis that you then do a regression business growth model on. You actually have to do it grounded in the unit economics of the industry. And what's interesting about our industry is we don't have commercial pricing for anything lunar yet. Not data, not hardware, not software, not automation, not all the infrastructure that enables the creation of the data, regardless of the application for which that data would be sold. So throwing the paint on the wall of what should I charge for producing silver on the lunar surface, that's going to be fun for me.
Oh, yeah.
That's great. Mandy, what about you?
So I'll answer it a positive way and then a word of caution way, but I'll put my Revolution Space hat on for a second to say, back to your LunaNet point and just the ubiquity of comm, and we need to have that here too, by the way. But so I'm excited about what that can do, because then, just like when we created the internet, and finally, like, the world is kind of largely connected and somewhat instrumented. What do you learn? What happens? What values generate? Who knows? right? But to have that kind of that technical basis in the background that allows that flexibility to happen could be really mind-boggling. And then the one note of caution I need to say here too is just because, again, putting on kind of the national security lens of this is how do we get the lunar economy to really be what we want it to be? And like there's quotes that I've seen out where the Chinese lunar program manager has made references in terms of when they ask him, like, why are we going to the moon? Why are we doing this? And he makes references, well, if we need to go now. And he uses he talks about the Spratly Islands and some of the other islands, but he's using the Chinese names for them, not the internationally recognized names for these territories. So it's telling unto itself, and that's part of why they're like, that's why we need to go now. So I just kind of caution that it's one where, to your point, it's going to be chaos.
Yeah.
Right, but then at the same time, where are we going to help kind of establish the example and the norms?
Yeah, I mean,
The moon is not the next Spratly Islands.
when you think about the late 90s, it was chaos in Palo Alto, up to Redwood Shores, down to San Jose, and the Ethernet was not an automatic winner. Matter of fact, it's not for engineers. It worked out better for businesses, but an engineer would never build a network with known failures in it. That's IPX, that's SPX, that's fiber channel. Those were much better engineered networks, and they failed. You couldn't have predicted Ethernet being a winner. So every business that was looking to network more and more devices over greater and greater distances had to wrestle, are we going to make investments in this one or that one or this one? It was only through trial and error and the accelerated growth curve of connected devices and users that made something that was designed to fail but recover the optimum. Do not know what's going to work on the moon.
Right.
We have to go find out.
Well said.
And to Blair's point, I come from the mining industry, so decision-making under uncertainty and high-risk ventures and exploring and prospecting of things is second nature to us. It makes engineers very uncomfortable because they're looking for 4 nines of benefits. So I should probably talk a little about risk. And so one of the things that we've been doing at Interstellar Mining and with WGM, my terrestrial company, is working with Blair's firm on a product called Moundhound, which is designed to de-risk the operations to allow the confidence to go out there and figure out where exactly the resources are, because anything we develop on the moon is all going to be based on where the resources are, because where the resources are going to dictate where the colonies are, the landing pads, the infrastructure, the orbital dynamics for the communication satellites and networks, where the Wi-Fi's got to go, power grids, and all that infrastructure. And it is the core of basically a snowball that will build and grow from something very small. I know at Interstellar Mining, we, as part of our philosophy, we believe all roads lead to us because we are the source of the material that are going to build all of this stuff and power it all with it. So, so I see that the risking element is very critical and gets very little discussion, actually. But of course, for those familiar with investing fundamentals, it's not just reward, it's the risk. And so given the fact that for at least space resources, for water and volatiles, we actually haven't touched the surface yet. And I know that geology, mining, prospecting, and exploration is a boots-on-the-ground profession. But it's very costly to do it, so you got to figure out how to minimize your risk, maximize your chances of success, and to Blair's point around the chaos, go through those trials and errors and the crashes and other things, because it's a non-trivial thing to do. It's risky. With it, but the rewards are literally astronomical. So,
Well, and I think the fun part was walking into a room full of government-paid aero astroneers and giving them a probability chart that never made it to 90 and watching them squirm like, how's this a product? Well, this is how the mining industry works. 80%, you're digging there. And it's a different mindset. And so when these other industries come into our bubble, which is expanding, is fantastic because they're bringing these other disciplines and we all get uncomfortable, and that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, you speak to a different mindset, and I know that there's quite a few students as well as maybe folks who are early on in their careers here. So we'll wrap up with one more question, but what advice might you give to someone who is a student or just starting off in the space industry that you would say would be valuable for them if they want to get involved in the cislunar economy or any companies in the space? Want to start?
Okay. Well, by way of background also, I sit on the Canadian Institute of Mining Management and Economic Society in Canada, and I'm in charge of professional development. So I work with students quite regularly on this. And so when they find out about the space stuff, they get very excited, geek out, like we all do. But the one advice I give them is this is a new and emerging market, so have yourself based in effect, a terrestrial day job to pay the bills. Well, this is evolving because else you'll starve. So it's a very exciting and interesting thing, but definitely you want to dual track this because it's going to be bumpy.
De-risking is a thing I'm noticing.
Started my career as a compliance officer, so I understand this stuff implicitly.
Awesome. Sita?
I may disagree with you, Jeff. We're hiring at Space Tango, and we have great benefits. So if you want a career, got a team here, come talk to us. And or there's a number of different ways to be a meaningful member of the cislunar economy, government service people. I loved what you were saying, Mandy, before about what is China's, not just motivation, what is their told explicit motivation in public domain, and how are they designing how much of the GDP they're going to invest in all of the capabilities, whereas here, there's so many different ways to invest knowledge and capability. You could do it as an engineer, that's the obvious pathway, and working at a company, come at us. You can also do it working for one of the multiple US government agencies that are investing taxpayer dollars, at least in the United States. I know this also may be an international crowd, so there are other, both traditional civil space agencies. There's also agencies of technology, agencies of health, agencies of science that are meaningfully investing taxpayer dollars, but they're looking for critical thinking and ethics in shaping what the policy norms should be, could be for commercial providers, just as much as for governments talking to each other to have a sustainable presence that is dominated by those who accept international norms, not dominated by those who openly reject them. So I think that informed ethical policy, international policy ecosystem could very much benefit from your knowledge and your critical thinking that you're experiencing here as well. All that being said, come to Space Tango.
So I've got two answers for this. First, top down. One of the hats I wear, I've got the privilege of also working with Professor Dan Hastings on the Space Council's Users Advisory Group, where I chair the STEM Education and Outreach Committee, which is just amazing. But part of my thesis there, coupled with the day job on whole dual-use tech, is leveraging these architectures and this expansive, more diverse industrial base, and when I say diverse, I mean in every sense of the word, all these companies should have a role to play, both in the commercial and the national security elements. So then the flip side of that to the students is keep looking. There is a company out there that is the perfect fit for you. And we're working so hard to try to have the policies and the buying power and create the economic environment that all of those companies can have a role in what this cislunar economy can be. And also to remember that it's not just STEM, it's everything, right? It's every single discipline. It's whether you're at the tip of the spear actually landing something on the moon or not, doing the fundamental analytics of what are you about to do. It's everything. And I think that it's a win-win if we can just really, everyone can have a role to play in this, and you can have a role to say, I touched that thing that is now in space. I helped make that happen.
Yeah, I end up judging hackathons a lot, even like Harvard's space medicine hackathon. And constantly what I see are students questioning whether they have the right to be there. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because what any market needs is people with passion. So bring your passion to space. One person really loved fabrics and understanding fabrics. And I'm like, perfect, space has got a job for you. And she was like, huh? I'm like, oh yeah. You know, think of spacesuits as little spacecraft.
Thought of designing the ones for Axiom.
Yeah, I mean, that's
part of the space economy.
So I just would hate to think that there's someone in this audience right now thinking there's not a place in space for you. Mm-hmm. Yes, there is.
There is.
And if you want to come to Lunar Station, let me know.
Oh, and next week is your place in Space Week.
That's right.
Well, yeah, so there's ways to explore this right now. Right.
Amazing. Well, we have a little over 5 minutes left, so I'd love to open it up to audience Q&A. I think there should be some mics in the back. If anyone has questions for our panelists, you can ask them now, and maybe just, the lights are a little bit strong, but maybe you can just raise your hand and someone with the mic will come over.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to go back to the first question. My favorite moon movie is actually Alien. Everything I know about space mining, I learned from Alien. But my question is, so planetary protection, as we move from governments doing things that are influenced by COSPAR, now we have private actors that are doing things. And so I will just say tardigrades, how do we prevent bad kinds of things happening when we go explore this rather new virgin area, which is the providence of mankind and all that good stuff from Outer Space Treaty. Thank you.
Awesome. I'll open up to any panelists.
Yeah, I would say it's going to operate just like international waters. We'll be out there with our allies. Our allies are already starting to organize around the Artemis Accords, which is great. And it's on us as a conglomerate of the planet to say, here's what's good, here's what's bad, here are the rules, travel on the left side or the right side, but always be on that side. And then as far as knowing that a bad actor is there and doing bad things is the first step, because like an alien, nobody can hear you scream in space. Mm-hmm. So if you don't really have a good sense of sensing what's going on and awareness, what happens in space stays in space.
To your point there, Blair, really, especially in the early days, it's going to come down to hard power. The ability to get out there and actually enforce the will. Under the Outer Space Treaty currently, no country has the ability to enforce sovereignty in space because you can't own anything. So the thing is that aside from some of the international conventions on piracy and damage to spacecraft and things, it's great to have a law, rules, regulations, whatever. Somebody doesn't follow them, how do you stop it? Because there's no courts, no police, nobody stopping any of this, so it's going to require that. And it's very similar to what you've seen if you look at the terrestrial experience in, new lands. They were largely lawless, and then civilization followed the money. It started with the commercialization and exploiting the resources of that particular area, and then the rules and government followed. So that's where I see the natural evolution of this following along with how we've done it on Earth for a long time.
I might offer, I think if I understood the question right, it's the role of commercial industry kind of leading the way in a way that the government used to. And yeah, in principle, commercial space companies were not naturally incentivized to behave ethically and to establish ethical environments. We just want to make profit. I think that's too simplistic of an approach towards understanding what motivates, especially American commercial space companies, but actually especially commercial space companies. The space industry, we are by design inclusive. We are by design for humanity, right? So even if we are building hardware, I actually think commercial space companies are going to take they're going to encumber a lot of the risk to protect the value of their asset, whether the government protects them or not, in a way. So I think there's a more complex way to think about if commercial industry is leading the path towards a sustainable cislunar economy, we may actually be better positioned to partner with government agencies to protect the value of our assets because we own them. See what I mean? There may be more to that, so I don't think it's as cut and dry.
And the only thing I'll add is, I think this was also mentioned in the earlier panel quickly too, but this week, the OSD policy on commercial space integration was released, and behind the scenes, we were trying to help that discussion. And the fact that even is the first time officially on paper, they're like, we're gonna have this conversation. Yeah. What does protection mean, both financial and physical? What does defend mean? Let's have the conversation. So we're just really thrilled that we can embark on that.
That's great. Thanks for that question.
So my question's for Sita. You talked about the pricing equation, which is vital, and I think the best example, which is the one you gave, is how pricing
was off the record, by the way.
Well, I'm going to try to put you a little more on the record because it's a great example. And it's probably, in terms of price times quantity, it's probably the high score to date on any relevant space economy in the commercial sector, how that 55 million was determined for the crew price. I always thought it was a 30% discount off the Russian price because, you know, and the, you know, Russians learned capitalism from us. They quadrupled the price in the 10 years leading up to the shuttle retirement from like 20 million that Dennis Tito paid to, I think it was 80 before the end of just after the end of the shuttle program. So could you give us some more visibility into how that 55 million was actually determined?
Absolutely not. No, I think it's a good question. And even the number, thank you for it, the number is often talked about in public domain by a number of different parties to try to put some paint on the wall and see exactly what would someone be willing to pay. But the one sort of rubric that I think anybody in the human spaceflight segment of the overall space economy, whether you're talking about the ISS, whether you're talking about CLDs, whether you're talking about the moon eventually, focuses on is really the valuation on the NASA IDIQ for crew time, right? When you're actually putting US taxpayer dollars against waste management, against power, against comms, our favorite, those things actually have already been codified. And when you multiply that by the amount of time that a private individual needs to use, it's literally like booking a hotel stay. And then you think about what fees can you add on top of that? What insurance is required? What insurance do you as a provider for transportation encumber? What insurance does the station encumber? Guess what? Not a lot. Also, what kind of insurance is required for the launch segment versus the in-orbit segment versus the destination segment? You break all of those things apart, and you get some really great individual unit economics that contribute to maybe a pretty high number. It's not, it's not just paint on the wall, but you do have to start somewhere. And for sure, anybody in the human spaceflight segment of the chain will point to NASA's IDIQ for what it takes to pay for an astronaut. And at the end of the day, think about it. I mean, this is risky for human life so that we can learn more. And what you were saying about risk is spot on, but when you think about the risk of mining or the risk of building something and breaking it as hardware, or the risk of the Ethernet not working and failing, or the software, the transmission not occurring, that's one thing. The human in spaceflight, the valuation of risk of a human life, that's something that you have to not just pay very close attention to the unit economics around life insurance, transportation insurance, et cetera, but you actually have to really be ethical and empathetic at the same time. So I would argue the human part of human spaceflight is probably the most challenging aspect, not just from a pricing perspective, but really from a you should take this risk on perspective.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. That's going to be the end of our panel, but I know we're going to be around later, and so I hope you can all chat with the wonderful panelists on stage.
Thank you.